Gideon was a judge over Israel. Although the Bible describes him as timid, Gideon is known as the greatest of all the 15 judges. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." And Gideon said to him, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, 'Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?' But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian." Judges 6:12-13. And he said to him, "Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." Judges 6:15. Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." Judges 8:23. Who was Gideon in the Bible? What makes his story significant for Christians today? Gideon in the Bible. Compared with some of the other judges ruling Israel, Gideon seems to get a lot of press in the Old Testament, covering more than 2 chapters, compared with some of them only getting part of 1 chapter. Known as the greatest judge of Israel, readers might be surprised when they dive into the narrative to find a timid ruler. In fact, when we first meet him, he's hiding from the enemies on a threshing floor. Gideon, from the least of the least in terms of tribes, receives a call from God to take on the Midianites, a nomadic and huge group of people who depleted Israel's supplies. This article will dive into the person of Gideon, what God does to make him an even more unlikely candidate to save Israel, and why it matters to us today. When it comes to Gideon, readers actually have quite a bit to unpack in Judges 6:11 through Judges 8:32. Although this article won't dive into everything, it'll highlight 2 major portions of Gideon's story. I highly suggest reading the entirety of the 2 chapters to get a full picture of Gideon and all God accomplished through him. Read the full text of Gideon's biblical account in Judges 6-8. Gideon tested God using fleece. When Gideon hears he will save the Israelite people from his oppressors, he doesn't really believe it at first, so he tests God. This right off the bat seems to contradict the command not to put the Lord to the test, Deuteronomy 6:16. But Gideon appears to test God a lot. First, he requires God to put dew on a fleece he lays out instead of on the ground. Then he asks for the opposite, a dry fleece and wet ground. Then once more, the opposite. As suggested in this article, this wasn't the proper thing to do and came from a lack of faith. Nevertheless, God will pull out all crutches from underneath him and force Gideon to rely on him in the next part of the story. Gideon and the army of 300. When God wanted Gideon to bring an army to take on the enormous Midianite army, he brought 32,000 men, Judges 7. Although not as sizable as the Midianites, it's enough for Gideon to be comfortable with leading the charge. God has other plans. He decides to enlist a series of tests of his own on Gideon, reminiscent of the tests Gideon had for him in the previous chapter. First, he makes Gideon send home anyone who is afraid. It turns out 22,000 of the people in the army have their doubts and head on their way. Now with 10,000 left, God makes them drink water. Apparently, only 300 of the men drank water by putting their hands to their mouths. The other 9,700 who knelt to drink were sent home. With just 300 men now, Gideon knows he has to rely on God to provide a miracle. But God has an even odder plan in place. They won't even have to invade or attack to wipe out the Midianites. He has them create as much noise as possible by blaring trumpets and smashing jars. This confuses the men in the Midianite camp, and they end up killing each other in the chaos. What can we learn from Gideon's story? 1. God can work with a little bit of faith. Overall, we can learn that God can work through anyone, even timid believers of little faith. A leader doesn't always mean the boldest and most extroverted. God often works through believers who come from the least of the least, like Gideon. When we're hiding from what scares us most, God compels us to tackle it head on. 2. But God wants us to trust Him. Second, God doesn't allow metaphorical crutches. Although He plays along with Gideon's fleece tests, when it comes to the actual battle, He refuses to let Gideon have a cushion of a bulky army. Reducing him to the bare essentials of 300, they know they have to rely on God for victory. The same happens in our lives. We can often have various cushions that offer comfort. Maybe we have jobs that provide enough income for a cozy retirement, or other members of the church who step up into leadership roles we'd rather not fill ourselves. We can only hide on the threshing floor for so long before God pulls us out of our comfort zones to do His amazing work. No matter what the case, God will reduce our numbers down to 300. When He does so, we have to rely on Him to do what we thought was impossible. Judges 8:10. 10. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with a force of about 15,000 men, all that were left of the armies of the eastern peoples. 120,000 swordsmen had fallen. Judges 8:22-23. 22. The Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian." 23. But Gideon told them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." Judges 6:11-12. 11. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. 12. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Judges 6:13-14. "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all His wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Judges 6:36-40. 36. Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have promised." 37. Look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said. 38. And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowlful of water. 39. Then Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece, but this time make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew." 40. That night, God did so. Only the fleece was dry. All the ground was covered with dew. Judges 7:21-25. 21. While each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. 22. When the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. The army fled to Beth-shittah toward Zererah, as far as the border of Abel-Meholah near Tabbath. 23 Israelites from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh were called out, and they pursued the Midianites. 24 Gideon sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and seize the waters of the Jordan ahead of them as far as Beth-barah." So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they seized the waters of the Jordan as far as Beth-barah. They also captured 2 of the Midianite leaders, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. They pursued the Midianites and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon, who was by the Jordan. Judges 6:15-20. 15. "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." 16. The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." 17. Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me." 18. "Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, "I will wait until you return." 19. Gideon went inside, prepared a young goat, and from an ephah of flour he made bread without yeast. Putting the meat in a basket and its broth in a pot, he brought them out and offered them to him under the oak. 20. The angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread, place them on this rock, and pour out the broth." And Gideon did so. Judges 7:1-10. One early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. 2. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me." 3. Now announce to the army, "Anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. 4. But the Lord said to Gideon, "There are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you there. If I say, 'This one shall go with you,' he shall go. But if I say, 'This one shall not go with you,' he shall not go." 5. So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, "Separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink." 600 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. 7. The Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home." 8. So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept the 300, who took over the provisions and trumpets of the others. Now the camp of Midian lay below him in the valley. 9. During that night, the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up, go down against the camp, because I am going to give it into your hands." 10. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant, Purah. Judges 7:11-20. 11. And listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So he and Purah his servant went down to the outposts of the camp. 12. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley, thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. 13. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. "I had a dream," he was saying. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend responded, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." 15. When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down and worshipped. He returned to the camp of Israel and called out, "Get up! The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." 16. Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, he placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them, with torches inside. 17. "Watch me," he told them. "Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do." 18. "When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp blow yours and shout, 'For the Lord and for Gideon.'" 19. Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had changed the guard. They blew their trumpets and broke the jars that were in their hands. 20. The 3 companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars. Grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow, they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon,